Welcome to episode 4 in our series on Judaism and animal welfare. And we're continuing the basic thread of this series. In this episode, we're going to analyze scriptural and Talmudic sources for the idea of treating animals with compassion, treating the planet with sensible directives. But let's first of all, what is the essence of compassion for animals? Why must we have compassion for animals? If we take the direction of imiteo Deo, which is to imitate God's ways, we know that God has compassion on man. And he also has compassion on animals. So we have to be a mirror of this attribute of God and show compassion to animals. And I think it's noted by God in a far more serious way than perhaps we could ever imagine. So I think taking time to think about this is very important, and to perhaps respect the fact how serious a directive this is. So let's look at a quote from the Sefer Hasidim, which was a medieval work on being pious. It was called the Book of the Pious. And to quote from there, the author said, "Be kind and compassionate to all creatures that the Holy One, blessed be He, created in this world. Never beat nor inflict pain on any animal, beast, bird, or insect. Do not throw stones at a dog or a cat, nor kill flies or wasps." So very important. I think rather than think about what bad you could do to the aforementioned animals and insects, we should perhaps, when I say we should think about what we are doing, a simple act like putting bird seeds out for wild birds is seen by God, I'm sure, as a very benevolent act, and an act that deserves a lot of credit. I'll tell you why. I think, this is my own personal view, when you look after a pet that you've taken on the responsibility to look after, you have a responsibility because you've taken on its life, basically the responsibility for its life. But when you set aside food for wild birds or wild squirrels, you're doing something that you don't expect to have any reward from the actual animal. You have enjoyment, yes, of course, and that is a reward in itself. But it's an unselfish thing to put out bird seeds for wild birds that are not part of your kind of household, not a pet of yours. And I think this is it's a higher grade of mitzvah than perhaps we realize. Especially since in Pirkei Avos, I forget where the Mishnah is, but I think the saying goes, make God's will your will, and then God will make His will your will. And this perhaps is mirrored in the idea of go forth and multiply and to be fruitful for animals, where God commanded them to go out and be fruitful and multiply. If you make the life of a wild animal easier to live, in other words, the sustenance, its food source is helped out enormously by you putting out nutritious seed and nuts. You are doing God's will. You are helping God perform His desire for creation. And I think this is a far greater mitzvah than perhaps we realize. So simple acts like that, being proactive, perhaps will do yourself more good than you could ever imagine. Now let's move on to the idea from Bereshit chapter 1 verse 28, where we are told that God gave us dominion over the animals. Perhaps this word dominion has been taken out of, has been maybe mistranslated, perhaps not mistranslated, but misunderstood. We know that Rav Kook was a great man in terms of his kindness towards animals and his theories. And I'd like to quote something that he said regarding this idea of dominion and how we shouldn't be dominating animal life, but we should be stewards. Like I've said in previous episodes, we should be, as if we're a family and we have parents who is gods, we should be the children, we should be the eldest child, the ones that tries to be as responsible as possible. So I'll quote Rav Kook in regards to the word dominion, to have dominion over animals. He says, "There can be no doubt in the minds of every thinking man that the concept of dominion as expressed in the Torah does not in any way imply the rule of a haughty despot who tyrannically governs his people and his servants for his own personal selfish ends and with a stubborn heart. Heaven forbid that such a repulsive form of servitude be forever integrated in the world of the Lord, whose tender mercies are on all his works, and of whom it is said," and he quotes, "He shall build a world of kindness," end quotes. And also, in a similar theme, the great Rambam, Maimonides, also taught about kindness to animals in his magnus opus, The Guide for the Perplexed. And he wrote, "There is no difference between the worry of a human mother and an animal mother for their offspring. A mother's love does not derive from the intellect, but from the emotions, in animals just as in humans." He also, Rambam also believed that animals must enjoy some sort of olam haba, or eternal life, to make up for their suffering on earth. So very interesting. And we're going to look now at something along the lines of animal welfare. We're going to talk a little bit about Talmudic enactions regarding the environment. So we know that Jewish law prevented pollution of waterways by mandating that sewage be buried and not to just dumped into rivers. You can see this in developing countries where they don't have a system of removing rubbish. They tend to put it within their waterways, and this leads to tremendous disease and terrible living conditions. We know that in Yerushalayim, ancient Yerushalayim, the idea of heaping dung and rubbish piles were banned, and you couldn't put refuse in anywhere near water systems. Also in Devarim, if we took at scriptural enactments, the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 23, that required that armies waging war abroad disposed of their human waste by burial. Also regarding Talmudic halacha regarding air pollution, we know that in Old Jerusalem, the problem of air pollution from wheat chaff meant that threshing houses for grain could not exist within 2 miles of the city. Also for odours, for foul odours. A similar halacha was enacted for graves, carrion and tanneries. Tanneries specifically being required to be constructed on the edge of town, and also had to be built downwind to prevent air currents bringing it back towards human habitation. And just to finish off this idea of conservation, we know that in Kohelet Rabbah, we hear how God instructed Adam Harishon to care for trees in particular. And I quote from Kohelet Rabbah: "At the time that the Holy One, blessed be He, created the first man, He took him and had him pass before all the trees of the Garden of Eden, and said to him, 'See my works, how fine and excellent they are. Now all that I created was created for you. Think about this, and do not harm or desolate the world, for if you harm it, there will be none to fix it after you.'" So we are warned in the most black and white way to don't mess up what we have. If we leave things naturally, generally the environment and the climate mends any pollutants that we put in. But if it's on an industrial scale, we exceed the mopping up values of nature. So this is what we have to be careful about. We have to rein in our excesses and look after the one planet that we have. Perhaps this is a test from God to see what we'll do with our home. This is our home, and it's also God's home, so let's not forget that. He created it for us. He gave it to us, and we have to respect that. So in the next episode, we're going to concentrate on sources for Tzar Baalei Chayim and general conservation from the Talmud, specifically the Gemara, and I look forward to that next time.